seem to draw the distinction on protectionism because it somewhat happens every time we enter into difficult economic conditions. We circle the wagons and we start to pull back. When the right answer is to accelerate through the turn, open the economy further to stimulate what we know is underlying those things. Now, if I can, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the ISA, and I want to start with Ambassador Kirk, and I'd like to ask, what do you see as the essential elements from your country's perspective in the ISA?
Well, the good thing is hopefully I can be wonderfully brief, and you heard it echoed in some form by each of my four colleagues here, is that defined in some terms, it has to be ambitious. Now, whether you want to find that as flexible enough with both scope and coverage. And we do want it to be flexible enough that it can be multilateralized. And then secondly, it's just the timing. And it does feel that, I know it's got to be frustrating to all of you, because you all hear us say, okay, we want it to be ambitious, we want to get it done. But in Geneva, it just seems we always lapse into this trap of debating about, what kind of stove to buy, where we should cook, and we just want to somehow get on. But for us, I just think if anyone honestly sort of looked at the advances in technology over the last 15 years, it would provide all of us to understand we have to have an architecture that can accommodate that kind of growth in the future. I was privileged to do a high school commencement. Well, lots of them when I was there, because they just learned how to figures. Be sure it's mainly because I was free. They get your hair. You don't have to pay anything. So I did one at our school for science and engineering. And every school in America now has a magnet school for just science and engineers. But my co-presenter was one of the engineers from Texas Instruments. And he explained to these kids that basically everything that they learned when they entered high school about technology would be obsolete by the time they got to college. And that everything they learned at the pace of development, that everything they basically studied in college would probably be obsolete by the time they graduate. And I say that to remind us the pace of innovation and development in a globally competitive world, as Tim said, is just extraordinary. And I just hope we would embrace that as an opportunity and move away from the notion that we have to be obsessed with how this fits into docking into, a vehicle that was wonderfully appropriate in 1995, but that we've got to be more creative about coming up with an architecture that fits for the day. So for the U.S., it really is for us. It's about ambition, and it is about timing, and a commitment that we've got to find a way within all the challenges we had in Geneva to take advantage of these opportunities to say, what can we do? The plurilateral framework that can be multilateralized later. What can we do now to move forward and get that? So for us, I'd say timing and ambition is just absolutely critical.
Thank you. Mr. Barton, let me turn to you. I mean, you two have recently been involved in some pretty good negotiations here, and congratulations to both of you on your success there. What's most important from a Korean perspective with regard to this? Yes, and what are the essential elements that you're looking for from a Korean perspective?
Already many initiatives already point out the importance of services, not only for themselves, but also it can help manufacturing sector in terms of enhancing their competitiveness. So Korea knows the importance of service sectors. And if you look at the Korea-US FTA, and also at the same time Korea-EU FTA, we are considering them as a very high level negotiations result. So to participate in this kind of ISA, we may just put our agreement to the ISA agreement. Then that'll make a quite high model, high standard for other participants. So for Korea, we will consider that as a very, very important option, but we don't feel much burden in joining them. Only thing is maybe, as Mr. Kirk mentioned, we want to electrolyze to absorb all other participants and later on. That's the kind of real concern that we have. Otherwise, we are feeling pretty comfortable in joining the case.
Okay, so high standard agreement, able to be multilateralized are the most important things. Mr. Gonzalez, how about you? Most important things.
Well, I think we would like to see an ISA that would align itself with our best FTA. This would mean substantial sector coverage and no priority solutions, and with all those sorts of fines within the scope of the agreement. Adoption of market access commitments should correspond to actual practice. And they probably should be accompanied by both a standstill and a ratchet commitment with appropriate reservations and limitations. We have worked with both a negative and a positive list approach in our FTAs. We believe that a negative list approach is more ambitious, it's more transparent, but we think we should probably keep an open mind on this aspect. We see a merit in negotiating new disciplines and enhanced gas rules, particularly in certain areas such as electronic commerce, telecommunications, financial services, and government procurement. We also definitely see a very important role for trade facilitation when talking about services. We think it's a very, very important subject. Other areas I think may be explored as appropriate, but a balance must be struck between normative ambition at this stage and the importance of delivering results within a relative short period of time. And I think Ambassador Kirk spoke to this issue. This is an important issue that I also would like to support. And finally, I would like to also associate myself with the comments of Minister Clark as to the importance of bringing as much countries as possible to this negotiation. We see that there is a lot of value in doing that. We think that that is possible, and we definitely should aim at doing that.
Thank you. Mr.
Well,
Wells?
Tim, thank you. Let me zero in what I think is the number one problem, and that is how this relates to the multilateral process. Because I share all these views. Look, I've become a little more pragmatic over the years on these sorts of issues. If you look at what we're doing in TPP, for example, I think all of us who are involved are looking forward to welcoming you in and Bruno in the very near future. Is we see this just as a stepping stone to a broader trade investment liberalization framework for the whole of the ecosystem. It will ultimately include, to achieve its objective, all of those countries. Now, I sort of take that view of this agreement, I say. Look, I think the important thing is just to get something moving. My own personal experience tells me that if you get too preoccupied with trying to have perfectly symmetrical bits fitting in with one thing with the other, you end up actually doing a principle dear to our hearts of open participation and resolving those problems down the path in a fairly pragmatic way may end up being the best way forward.
Okay. Speed seems to be a theme here.
That's what my name is. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Ambition and timeliness of getting this done are both critical. Let me respond in a couple of ways. First of all, from Canada's perspective, our key interests would be in areas such as environmental services, energy, would be financial services, and as I mentioned in my opening comments, in the area of engineering. And in terms of our economy, approximately 14% of our goods and services exports are represented by services. Going the other way on imports, somewhere in the order of 18%. And I do want to piggyback on what Tim mentioned earlier. I'm so glad you raised that. There are still those that are tied up in the old archaic math, where exports are good, imports are bad. We have to move beyond that. I know most of you have. Given the fact that supply and value chains wrap themselves around the globe, and when it comes to services, how important services are in driving the trade in goods. We have to understand that both exports and imports play a critical role in economic growth in our economies and driving prosperity. And perhaps just as a broader comment, in Canada, we understand how important it is for us to focus on eliminating barriers going forward in terms of services trade. One of our challenges, I believe, in negotiating a services agreement is, again, going back to what Juan mentioned, is architecture. And there's been a lot of discussion about whether we use a negative list or a positive list. I tend to side with those that believe that a negative list would lead to a more timely conclusion to these discussions. But as with many of our partner countries in those negotiations, we are flexible in the approach that would ultimately be decided on. For me, the critical factor is, even though it is the multilateral context in which we hope this services agreement will eventually play itself out in, I would hope that as we negotiate, we're not constantly keeping an eye on the emerging economies with the prospect of perhaps trying to match our ambition to what we anticipate might be their ambition, understanding full well that each of the emerging economies will have a different level of ambition. And quite frankly, right now, my concern would be, let's make sure that the negotiations we're engaging with amongst our 20 partners does lead to a high-value, highly ambitious outcome. Because if we fail to achieve that, we hurt ourselves in the long term. I certainly believe that in the long run, the WTO family will embrace what we're doing through the decade.
Thank you. If I could summarize just a little bit, don't let best get in the way of better. Ambitious, able to be multilateralized, time, get busy doing something, take the opportunity while it exists today, or don't waste a crisis. And we have an opportunity now to move this thing rapidly forward. Mr. Clark, you ready?
At one other dimension, we talk about TPP, but we also see lots of things are going on in East Asia. One of them is regional comprehensive economic partnership reports, RCEP. I just want to draw some attention from Team Groser, because in that regional movement, this is also kind of FTA. So we have to encourage the participants of RCEP, which include India, China, all these kind of emerging economies, to go for higher level of service negotiation within RCEP. So that means later on they can be much easier to join ISA. So we have another role to play for other regions in other parts of the world. That's what.
Very good. Ambassador Kirk, let me ask you this question. Others feel free to weigh in. Short answer. How long does it take to reach an agreement? And what are the next steps in the process?
It can take as long as Doha, or it can take as short as President Lee and President Obama saying that there's two trade men that need to get us a deal in 3 months where you don't have jobs. Also, I mean, you know,
It's a certain incentive.
It is, I mean, God, if we get the answer to how long it takes, it is, and that's what went back to at least my observation about the progress we're making in TPP. Anytime it occurs, at least, and those of you in business know, the beginning of any deal is there's got to be a will to get it done. Second, there's got to be input on behalf of all negotiators to understand the deal means more than me coming in and getting everything I want. I've got to understand you got to want that. And if you've got partners that are willing to be flexible, accommodate one another, and get something done. But, and I know the frustration is just deals in Geneva, we say that, and we all understand how you do it. And I'm always using sports analogies with our colleagues, but I think with the world and the state of economic unrest as it is right now, I think, one, this is an incredible opportunity for the WTO to demonstrate our relevance in a multilateral place. This is the one place you can kind of get something done. But we need to put points on the board, you know, and it doesn't always, it's not always going to be, you know, a touchdown. But let's get something on the board. And that's, you know, we're a broken record on this. We think it's critical that we find a way. That those 20 of us, as Ed says, find a way. Now, I think if we do it, if we come into it with that spirit, we can put something together in a matter of months and not years. And from what we heard, at least from business last night in dinner, is that we need these answers, we need this localization now. And so I think it's imperative on those of us negotiators to understand that bottom line. But it takes, every deal doesn't have to take forever. You come and you're ready to make decisions, you're empowered to make decisions. As Tim says, the rest of it will fall.
Thank you.
Well,
Mr. Groser.
may I just say, first of all, I'm perhaps the greatest skeptic in the world about the value of putting in deadlines, roadmaps, timelines. I'm sorry, I just do not believe that they work. I'm sure that we will continue to do this and we will see the full ride. The key thing is momentum. And let me just say this, whatever time frame, I mean, first of all, we are still negotiating about the negotiation. Okay, let's not forget that. When we're told by our negotiators it's done, it's not done, we then start the negotiation. Okay? Now, if you want to have this in place, the key thing will be to get regulators involved. This is what does make services negotiations very complicated to keep, because trade negotiators by themselves can only take these negotiations up to a certain level. And it's absolutely critical that the ministers responsible for whatever shape of an agreement we might not get out of this actually get enough political support within their own countries to get the regulators interacting with each other. That will be absolutely crucial to determining how long this process takes.
Okay, we could just get a quick comment. We have many of the partners for TPP here today, and Minister Ferrari was set to join us, but got called away. Some old members and some incoming members.
And one aspiring member.
One aspiring member.
I would say.
Genetic aspiring member. Yeah, absolutely. What do you see the overarching benefits of an agreement like this? What are the top 2 things you see if we're able to press TPP across the board? Benefits.
Well, at least looking at the scale of it, again, it provides an immediate shot in the arm in a lot of economies. The 9, soon be 11 countries is a fairly powerful economic configuration, and one that allows us to spark some economic activity. Secondly, I think we are hopeful enough to believe that just as Costa Rica and other economies now, who all want economic growth, are willing to say, who's moving? Tim mentioned one thing, who's moving? We get this done. The instant thing for us are the back channel conversations we're having with economies all around the world that are all asking, when are you going to open up the TPP deals? And that's kind of a nice wind at our back to get it going, but as Ed said, it's got to get it done. But I think it has the potential to be an immediate sharpening on those 11 economies. And I am naive enough to believe that it can become a vehicle by which we see much broader trade liberalization, initially within Southeast Asia, but potentially on much broader.
If I could add from Canada's perspective, the North American Free Trade Agreement actually established the production platform that is now allowed our supply chains and our economies to become highly integrated. In autos, as all of you know, we're essentially fully integrated. And agriculture. Now, what we're looking at doing from a Canadian perspective is ensuring that we're part of the linking of our North American platform, the supply chains related to those, to the Asia-Pacific supply chains. I happen to be also minister not only of international trade, but the Asia-Pacific Gateway, which is a special priority that the Prime Minister has put on Canada's engagement within that region. And of course, the TPP is essentially the ideal, the perfect vehicle through which we want to achieve our goals, our aspirations within that region of the world. And we are very pleased and very grateful to Ambassador Kirk, Minister Groser, and the rest of the TPP partners for understanding that Canada can make a very valuable contribution in terms of some of the critical issues that's going to have to be addressed within the TPP.
May I just, and we've just completed the 14th round. The next round will be in Auckland, which we welcome Canada and Mexico for the first time. I think the answer to the question is extremely straightforward at a high political level. It's got to do two things. One, it's got to deal with the detritus of 20th century problems that still remain unresolved. It is not going to do just new agenda stuff. If it doesn't deal with the agenda of past problems, it cannot seriously portray itself as the model for future trade investment and immigration issues. And that's fully recognized in the Honolulu statement led by President Obama in Honolulu. And then it's got to do with the new stuff as well. So there's two sides to the coin, the old side and the new side. They're inextricably linked. We're not going to do one without the other. Just make that very clear. In terms of progress, actually, I think our officials, you have to understand this is like a major international conference between 600 and 800 officials apparently. I mean, Ron and I are never invited, so we only told what they're like. But,
that may explain why they're doing so well.
Exactly. 600 and 800 officials. It's like a major international conference, and that's before two other major economies, Canada, Mexico, and Jordan. So they've got 29 negotiating groups. They're called chapters. You can see the scale of this operation. 29 different sets of negotiators. And I think our officials across the existing have done a very, very credible job. They are still holding within the normal principle of nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. There can be no other basis of negotiation. But they are not hiding behind that to stop progress. So around about half of those 29 groups have either sort of done their work or reached a collective judgment that they've taken this about as far as they can until they get some political signals from the more contentious bits of the negotiation. So we're basically refining the process, narrowing down the scope to reveal the hard political choices. I think the negotiation is in reasonable shape.
We've got time.
Can I ask one thing? Just my one plea that I make to every audience like this. This is about as close to a coalition of one mind about trade as we're going to get. In fact, many of you in this room can't imagine there being anybody that would agree with anything that we say. There are a lot who disagree with what we say. And I'm just concerned that those of us that believe in trade, in which it's our lifeblood, not paying enough attention, speaking of technology, of what a marvelous tool for misinformation the internet is about trade. But I'm just telling you, there is this explosive expansion of groups that are angry about something that have had nowhere to dock, and they are now finding themselves all docking on this trade is bad narrative. I just say that I think it's incumbent on us that believe in trade, that whether it's ISA or TPP or Doha, we need to pay attention and begin to build a much more coherent argument to our basic constituencies around the world why trade really does provide a wonderful tool for doing what they've done in Costa Rica, which is to create economic growth, let people out of poverty, and that it's not a dirty work. Because like I said, we can do all the work in the world, but if we end up in a situation where the European Union can't even ratify something as passive as ACTA, I'm afraid what happens when we get to the political dynamics. Because it's one thing to negotiate these, we need a pact. So anyway, we need your help, we need your thought, we need your voices. Let's not make this a conversation among ourselves, but go engage others as well.
Thank you. We're going to take 2 questions, and I have a simple request. Make it a question, not a speech. And direct it if you would. So 2 questions, and then we've got to close our session. Yes, sir. Right here. It's you. Please state your name.
Yes, hi. I'm Yes. My name is Benny Hancock. I'm a reporter for Inside U.S. Trade. There's been a lot of talk by this. That's Kirk.
You should have said questions from the audience.
There's been a lot of talk about the architecture here and keeping this as open as possible to allow for innovation. Especially Ambassador Kirk, you stressed that a lot. And I know that you all are a little bit hesitant to talk in terms like negative list, positive list, but I'm wondering if I could ask Ambassador Kirk and anyone else that wants to comment, do you think it's really important that we have a negative list in order to allow for these kinds of innovations that are going to come out in the future? Thanks very much.
Well, you've heard a number of, obviously the United States has a bias toward the negative list because by definition, if you don't exclude it, everything else is in. And again, you just have to look at the explosive growth of technology. And you don't want to conclude an agreement that's not going to accommodate all of the incredible advances we're going to make. But I am very much moved by the colleagues. Just about every one of our other colleagues on the table has frankly done a deal with the U.S. and EU, and they've done both. So I wouldn't get hung up on that because obviously there's a way to accommodate it. I think Minister Groser's response is the more relevant one. If we try to get hung up on architecture, at some point we've got to figure out what is it we want to do, what is our mutually shared ambition, and then trust that we can find the right platform. Because obviously, Costa Rica and I think Korea and Canada have all said it best. They've done both approaches and they're working. Let's have something that recognizes this industry is going to help drive global growth and job development, and let's make it as accommodating of that as we can.
Another question?
Pascal Canet from the European Services Forum. Unfortunately, the Trade Commissioner from Europe was not able to come and join you today because we have a summit with China. So I wanted to be a bit speaking about the elephant in the room, which is not there, which is Europe on this panel. We would like clearly to say we support this initiative very clearly. We want an ambitious agreement. We are
Is this a question?
It's coming.
Okay.
The question is, we want inclusiveness. And I'm sorry to say the 20 countries around the room is not sufficient. Our companies want to go in the countries where the growth is. So we understand the BRICS are not able to join at this point in time, but there is a large number of countries in the world which probably will be very interested to join. The question is, have you contacted these countries? Is it able to enlarge this group of the real good friend of services so to make sure that the developing countries and emerging countries want to join this group as soon as possible?
I want to be on one response. First off, I want you to know we do have representatives from the European Union, and Mark, who was Mark is Mr. Everything for the EU. The EU is well represented, participated in the dinner. All of us are desirous of having all of the members of the WTO be a part of this. But it goes back to that tension that you've heard so many of us speak of. We can sit and wait on them. But what we've also heard from you as a business group is that, come on, folks, it's been 16 years. What can you get now? I happen to believe, I mean, there may be 20 of us here, but we still represent, someone said, what, 70% of trade and services? If we liberalize among ourselves, there's room enough for growth there. The one thing I've learned from in my brief time in this job, our friends among the BRIC economies are pretty smart. They're really smart. And they're more than capable of making a judgment on their own that this is a train they don't want to, I will, it's a horrible analogy and I shouldn't use it, but when I was mayor, I inherited a council that was about as close to the dynamics in Doha as you could believe. We fought about everything. And I used to use a mantra that if you get on the train, you don't get run over. But I tell everybody, this is a very slow train. But what I had to get them to understand, we have to move. And if people didn't want to be on the train when we moved, that was fine. We'd go slow enough for you to catch up. The imperative for us is to get this train rolling down the tracks. And I'm arrogant enough to believe that the brakes can figure out when they want to get on this train. We can sit here at the station, waiting on them. I think if we get the train moving, we'll be surprised how quickly they'll move to become a part of this.
So the really good friends are in, those that want to be friends are getting close.
Yeah, and this is a train with nothing but first-class service. So if you get on, if you get on late, we're not going to have you in the back with the cows and the pigs, but it's a train that needs to move. This is a Euro song. So.
Well, I would like to thank you for your time and attention today. Most particularly, I would like to thank our panel who gave so freely of the time today to discuss these hugely important issues with us. Thank you all. This will close